For my book study, I chose Multiplication is for White People, Raising Expectations for Other People's Children by Lisa Delpit. First, let me tackle the quote within this title, Multiplication is for White People. This quote came from a young black girl during her tutoring session. The tutor was trying to teach her to multiply and divide, and the young black girl replied by saying, multiplication is for white people. Black people only add and subtract. And this spoke to the lowered expectations that are sometimes ingrained in the children within poor and black communities. This book is broken into 4 parts. Each part is composed of various chapters. The first part is Inherent Ability, which is composed of Chapter 1, There's No Achievement Gap at Birth, and Chapter 2, Infinite Capacity. I found 3 takeaways in Part 1. The first takeaway is that there's no achievement gap at birth. In fact, black children tend to outperform their European counterparts prior to formal schooling. The stereotype threat produces anxiety when people feel that their actions have the potential to confirm negative stereotype. So in a nutshell, people tend to perform poor when they feel that they are going to fulfill the negative stereotypes that are associated with their culture. Minority children receive a subtractive education, which means their education takes away from their culture and who they are, and they're often labeled as slow because they have not mastered the norms of middle class white America. Black children are capable of excelling the same way they did prior to desegregation and freedom schools if teachers were to teach them like their survival depended on it, instead of using poverty as an excuse for failure like Ruby Payne's poverty theory. In this section, they gave an example where a mother bear is teaching her cub to fish. The mother bear never says, well, maybe my cub is not good at fishing. Maybe he'll never learn. They know that that is something the bear cub needs to survive. So they continue over and over and over and over again to teach it to the baby cub until they master it, because that's something they need to survive. That same thought process must be taken into the educational system, because prior to desegregation, where African American students were taught by African American teachers in freedom schools, that was the philosophy that was taken there. The third takeaway is students are affected negatively by our society's deeply ingrained bias equating blackness to inferiority while equating whiteness to purity and innocence. Here's an example of terms that are commonly used in our society that are attributed to the inferiority of the evilness of blackness. Blacken means to be defamed. If you're blackballed, you're ostracized. If you're blacklisted, you're on a list of undesirables. So if everything culture is telling you that you're not enough, you're inferior, that goes back to you are going to be what you are called. You're going to be what people expect of you. And that's what oftentimes happens with our black students in schools. Part two is educating the youngest. The chapters that part 2 are composed are chapter 3, stuff you would never say, successful literacy instruction in elementary classrooms. Chapter 4, warm demanders, the importance of teachers in the lives of children of poverty. Chapter 5, skin deep learning, teaching those who learn differently. Chapter 6, I don't like it when they don't say my name right. Why reforming can't mean whitening. I also found 3 takeaways from this section as well. Takeaway 1 is there's an unspoken message that children with learning differences do not need to learn. Schools are forcing kids to go against their natural instincts, which are to learn and grow, and stifling their learning by making them just sit and listen all day. Branding students of socially stigmatized groups promotes the stereotype threat. If you are branding if you have a classroom that is low performing and you label that the remedial class, that's further stigmatizing those kids. That's further stigmatizing those kids. They suggested naming classes like that for struggling learners, things like critical thinking classes or something like that that may have a positive connotation to it. Also, let me go back for a second, but also in that section, they talked about the connection between students who attended remedial classes or remedial courses and the percentage of them who are in prison. The majority of people who are in prison at some point in their life, they took remedial courses. Moving on to takeaway 2. Nothing makes more difference in a child's schooling than a teacher. School-dependent kids need good teachers more than anyone because all their schooling comes from the teacher or the school. Students in these situations learn for, not from their teacher. Warm demanders, although often seen as mean teachers, care about students and share a cultural identity with the kids and that the kids recognize and respond to. Reform leads to the reduction of black teachers. So first, let's go back to school-dependent children. Lisa Delpit shared a story where she was trying to teach her 7-year-old when her 7-year-old daughter was interested in softball. All she knew about softball is that you needed a bat and a ball. So she enrolled her in a community team. The coach came to her, after her 7-year-old daughter Maya was able to tell you the different parts of the field, the different rules and things like that. But after practice, the coach came to her and said, these are the things I need for you to practice with her at home. And she responded by saying, who do you think I am? I don't know anything about softball. That's why I brought her there. And she said that situation made her think about parents who were uneducated or not educationally inclined when it comes to school. They send their kids to school because it is something that they are not capable of doing. They don't have the luxury that a lot of middle class families have. These kids are considered school dependent because their knowledge, their schooling and things are going to come solely from the teacher. So that's why the type of teacher and the type of schooling that they get is so important. And then they were saying these warm demanders are people who do not allow poverty to be an excuse. They have high expectations and the kids know that. And when I talk here about reform leading to the reduction of black teachers, they use post-Katrina New Orleans as an example where 75% of the teaching population was African American prior to Hurricane Katrina, and after Hurricane Katrina, less than 50% of the population was African American. This population of teachers serves a 95% black student base. And a lot of times when reform programs come around, just like in the desegregated South, it means that black teachers are pushed out. They're pushed out for programs such as Teach for America. Even in the times prior to desegregation, black teachers from freedom schools were more qualified and more had more degrees and things like that, but they found different divisive tactics to push these teachers out to ensure employment opportunities for white teachers. Okay, basic needs need to be taught in a meaningful context, such as thematic units, so the students can make real-world connections with the content. Teacher-proof scripted programs are not present in schools that serve low-income minorities. In this section, they talked about cronyism, where situations such as programs such as Reading First and Voyager are ways that politicians award their friends and give their friends money. They make millions of dollars off the backs of poor minority children. They force these programs into their communities, knowing that they are not research based, knowing that they will fail so that they can get money. They use the example of the Passport Voyager program, which was originally worth approximately $3 million, but after being endorsed by the Bush administration and being put on the Bush payroll for the No Child Left Behind program, it was worth tens of millions of dollars. Okay, moving on to part three. Part three, teaching adolescents. Part three is composed of chapters 7, 8, and 9. Chapter 7 is picking up the broom, demanding critical thinking. Chapter 8, how would a fool do it? Assessment. Chapter 9, shooting hoops, what we can learn about the drive for excellence. Okay, the first takeaway from this section is one function, and I'm going to refer to a quote within the section, within one of the chapters. One function of the school curriculum is to celebrate the culture of the dominant group and then to ignore and scorn the culture of the subordinate group. Students part of a stigmatized and oppressed group must think for themselves or forever be victims of society's whims. And in this section, they reference the miseducation of the Negro, which was published in 1933, with so many negative connotations and negative stigmas and stereotypes associated with blackness. It is very important that they develop critical thinking skills and think for themselves. And they reference the school here, Benjamin E. May School, where all male school, where the students said, what makes your school different? And they said it was Afrocentric. And the interviewer asked, what does it mean that it's Afrocentric? What about it being Afrocentric makes it different? And they responded by saying because it was Afrocentric, they were able to question everything. They didn't take everything in the text as true. In fact, they were able to ask questions and have discussions opposed to just taking all knowledge within the book as true. Moving on to takeaway number 2. Any skill can be developed with the right amount of practice and drive for excellence. Some people may have innate advantages, but not innate abilities. No one is born smart. Black children must feel welcomed in schools without feeling they must give up their blackness to be successful. We must make their culture seem appropriate, make their culture seem appreciated beyond sports by first providing representation for them within the community. In this section, they talked about Michael Jordan and a young boy who played basketball. The boy went out every day to play basketball. He would shoot 20, 30 shots every day. The first days he made 0, but he still came out there every day and he started getting better. He started making more shots and he just kept pushing himself until he was successful. They said the same thing with Michael Jordan. It wasn't that he had the innate basketball ability. His older brother Larry was better than him and oftentimes beat him. But after dealing with the humiliation, dealing with the humiliation and rejection he found when he did not make the varsity team in 10th grade, that drove him to excellence. He pushed himself harder and something clicked and he started to work extremely hard. We have to use this same motivation and drive that these kids have and that we encourage them to display in sports. We have to use the same motivation and make school fun the same way when it comes to academics. And we have to make sure they feel welcomed and their culture is appreciated. They talked about in this section when kids were actually reading about ancient Egypt, and they were seeing that, some of the people look like their fathers, their uncles, and they're like, these are not how the people on the mummy looked. And the importance of cultural representation. They talked about the lack of black princesses in Disney movies, and then when there was a black princess in The Princess and the Frog, she spent most of the time being a frog. These subtle messages and lack of representation in society and in our schools negatively affect the psyches of the black children and the minority children that we serve. Takeaway Takeaway number 3. Everyone does not have to be an expert on the culture, but should collaborate with a diverse group of people to analyze what's the best way to teach them. You can't teach children that you do not know. And this goes into the title, the chapter. I hate it when they say my name's wrong. But when they talk about kids in post-Katrina, New Orleans, and different places where teachers are unable to pronounce their names and the names of common places and locations, and they know that that teacher is not part of their culture, and when it's someone that is not part of their culture, it makes them step away from them. And this does not mean that they have to be of the same race, because they talked about another male teacher who they called a reverse Oreo. The teacher would say that the students would say that he was black inside, and when Lisa Delpit went to meet this teacher, she just thought that she was going to meet a young white man with sagging pants, who listened to rap music and things like that, who fit all the stereotypes of stereotypical persona. And when she went to the classroom to meet the man, he was a white man dressed in a suit, looked very business and preppy like. And she went back and she asked the kids, like, why do y'all say that he is black? And they pretty much responded, because he knows us, he values our culture. When we had a discussion about Emmett Till, he cried and he expressed his sometimes disdain and disgust in the ways of white people. So that was someone who was able to reach them and get to know them. It does not mean that only black children can be reached by black teachers, but you cannot approach kids with a savior complex and come with the notion of you're coming to save them and free them and things like that. You have to become an honorary member of their culture, and if you don't know about their culture, you're not a member of their culture. Collaborate with those who do know. Don't make assumptions. Okay, going on into part 4, University and Beyond. University and Beyond contains 2 chapters. Chapter 10, Invisibility, Disidentification, and Negotiating Blackness on Campus. Chapter 11, Will It Help the Sheep? University, Community, and Purpose. Okay, the first takeaway from this section is people are not aware of their own culture until we are taken out of it. But those a part of the dominant culture are rarely removed from their culture. So it is everyone's responsibility to support the less dominant culture by being courageous, humble when learning, and ensuring they are present and represented. If you look around and you see that you are discussing issues of Native Americans, make sure there's representation representation there, and make sure they are participating. If you're discussing the issues of low-income communities, make sure there's a representation there, and be courageous enough to, when you see foolishness, to live above foolishness, to defy foolishness, and learn with humility. You don't know everything, and you especially don't know everything about a particular culture, so be willing to actually hear them out and listen and engage in a dialogue. Part 2, invisibility syndrome, is when blacks are faced with disillusionment when their potential and basic humanity are ignored, misrepresented, or misguided. The Elvis Presley syndrome is when white people do not acknowledge black excellence. Black excellence is until it is appropriated by white people. Minorities face these each day when they are devalued, stigmatized, and made invisible in grade schools, universities, and the world in general. The invisibility syndrome spoke to situations that both her daughter and other students expressed, where they'll raise their hand and they will say something and nobody even acknowledges they're there. When it's one black person alone, nobody acknowledges and notices they're there. But then when there are two or more, it becomes a threat. It becomes an issue. It becomes, sometimes even in society today, a reason to call the police. But they are invisible in isolation. And then the Elvis Presley syndrome refers to the situation with like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry, where Chuck Berry put out a lot of, music and a style and things like that. And after being in prison, Elvis Presley came out and took his songs, lyrics, style, and all of those things like that. And then it was acknowledged by society because a white person said it. Although when Chuck Berry was released from prison, he did sue Elvis Presley and the recording companies for millions of dollars. But this same syndrome, this same situation, is present in society. It is present in society today. And then they also talked about the third takeaway. When the doll study was completed in the 1940s, it yielded the same results as when it was completed in 2011, which is evidence of the microaggressions that are unchanged and committing psychological assault on the self-esteem of blacks. There's no color blindness in our schools or our world. And this doll study, if you're not familiar with it, is when you give kids two dolls, or even in this case in the 2011 study, they have drawings of multiple dolls and they vary in colors, and black children on all cases chose the white doll. And when they chose the white doll, they asked why didn't they choose the black doll, and they said because that doll was mean, that doll was ugly, and things like this. And this goes back to those negative stereotypes that are ingrained in our children and cause them to have poor self-esteem and poor self-value. These microaggressions that we don't pick up on, the things like how blackness is equated to inferiority and meanness, and just the vocabulary within our language. Kids pick up on these microaggressions and they internalize them and carry them with them. Okay, next I'm going to move on to the author's premise. There's some, on most occasions, I agree with her. I agree with the vast majority of the content in this book. This book spoke to me and reaffirmed previously held long beliefs. Several of the personal stories and were experiences I shared as a minority, such as the busing to predominantly white schools to fill diversity quotas and special education over identification. I was a part of a program called M to M, Minority to Majority, where they went into inner city black black communities, and they recruited black students, and they bused them on a 2 hour, well, it ended up being a 4 hour round trip, 2 hours there and 2 hours back to these schools so that we could fit these quotas. And the feelings and the hostile environment that you feel in those situations, it stifles your ability to learn. And like several of those kids, you are over identified for special education. I identified with the personas such as the warm demander, and in my school, and children are indicative of the school students described. I'm a fifth grade teacher at a school that is in extreme poverty. Over half of the population is considered homeless and highly mobile. 99.6% of the kids receive free lunch in addition to free breakfast and a third meal before leaving. And only 3.4%, we have 66% African American, 29% Hispanic, and 3.4% Asian. So I deal with minority students. I value the representation, the content explored, and the point of view the author brought. The blackness of this book was refreshing. Oftentimes I'm working on my third degree now, and like she said, like she spoke of in this book, the black point of view is not often represented. Although this country was built off the work of blacks, we are not represented, we are not acknowledged when it comes to textbooks and curriculum, whether it's grade school or college, unless we're going to school for something like African American studies. So it was very refreshing to actually have this point of view. Okay, the disagreement that I would have, the students who learn differently that were addressed in this book had milder learning disabilities. A lot of the students she spoke of had ADHD. This approach does not speak to children who are rightfully placed in special education settings that have more profound learning disabilities, such as Down syndrome, things that mean that they are genetically different. So that's the only takeaway that I have. I'm all for all students can learn, and just because you are labeled special needs or something like that does not mean by any means that it's not still your civil right to get a good, adequate, and equitable education. Next, we're going to move on to the final component here, which is the features of the text. I judged the book off of the readability, the usefulness, and the reliability. First, I'm going to discuss the readability. It was easy to follow and to read. It was relatable. It was well organized, where the topic or even what the title said was very telling of what the chapter would be about. And then there was real world stories used to explain more complex topics. When she talked about things such as the invisibility syndrome, stereotype, threat, she gave a host of real world examples to connect with them, especially that's what made the vocabulary comprehensible, and unfamiliar terminology was thoroughly explained. It was written from the voice of a teacher, voice and point of view of a teacher, which I feel make it more relatable to teachers. Then when it comes to usefulness, it will be a book that will be ideal for professional development, and I will be buying my principal a copy, since he selects a book to read, selects a book for him to read and quote from every year. I am going to purchase this book for him. It is applicable to the current notion of schooling and the current climate of schooling. She didn't just point out all of the things that were wrong with the schooling system and the educating of black children. She offered solutions, multiple solutions for these vexing problems. Not only did she provide solutions, she also provided examples of people who made it work. Okay, then several experiences were native to Atlanta. She discussed the Atlanta School, Oakhurst Elementary Schools in Stone Mountain, Decatur, DeKalb County. So that makes it even more relevant to the teachers here because these were situations that occurred in metro Atlanta schools. And it examined relevant school programs. I have been a teacher since Voyager has been out, since the Read to Succeed, all of these different programs that got millions and millions of dollars and disappeared in no time with no results. I have, in my 8 years of teaching, I have been around for some of these programs. And then lastly, the reliability of the book. She has several reputable sources cited in each chapter. It's backed by research, graphs are shown, and tables and things like that. And the sources are organized by chapter and the notes and the conclusion of the text. So it's not as if you had to go hunt them down or they were scattered about. She had these resources there so that you could go and kind of fact check her. The author experienced a variety of school settings throughout the country. It wasn't just as if she was in an isolated location. She spoke of schools all over the United States. And then the author is a scholar, an educator, and a parent, which also adds weight to her opinion. Moving on. Just lastly, once again, the book was Multiplication is for White People, Raising Expectations for Other People's Children by Lisa Delpit. This is a picture of her here, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and I hope you enjoyed the review as well. Thank you.